When the first Japanese immigrants arrived as contract laborers in 1885, they joined a growing and diversifying Hawaiian society. The Japanese, like other ethnic groups, maintained many aspects of their native culture, even as they gradually learned to live as part of the larger, multi-ethnic society. In these early days, many associations such as Japanese language schools, dance academies, martial arts clubs, and temples and shrines were established in order to maintain and cultivate Japanese cultural values and pursuits. Even today, associations similar to those formed by the Issei are in operation. But over the years, and particularly in the years following World War II, when Japanese cultural practices were all but taboo, much of the culture of the first immigrant Japanese has gone or is rapidly disappearing. Many in the Japanese community, especially among the older generations, point out with alarm the decline in number of Japanese associations. Many such groups have witnessed drastic declines in their memberships or have disappeared altogether. Today, few of these remaining organizations attract young people into their folds. What does this seeming lack of interest in Japanese culture mean to the next generation? At a New Year's banquet for the Honolulu Japanese Chamber of Commerce, someone asked the question, "Who will cut next year's bamboo?" referring to the Kadomatsu, a traditional Japanese pine and bamboo arrangement displayed during the New Year's season. The question, of course, goes much deeper than merely worrying about maintaining a steady supply of Kadomatsu. It asks us to think about the future of Japanese American culture in Hawaii. I'm David Odo. Join me in thinking about the future. We'll meet 4 young artists whose work is a part of our culture. They will share with us their art, their hopes, and their concerns for the future. We'll meet Sashiko artisan Karen Matsunaga, who studied kimono sewing in Kyoto, but got interested in Sashiko, or Japanese stitchery, while practicing her sewing technique. Taiko master Kenny Endo will talk with us about his background in jazz, his 10 years studying and performing taiko in Japan, and his work here in Hawaii. Koto sensei Bani Miyashiro will let us sit in on one of her Koto classes and discuss the community support she sees as critical to the preservation of cultural traditions in Hawaii. And when we return, we'll meet bamboo artisan Bud Morrison, who probably made that Kadomatsu you bought last December, and see how he puts together the gates of pine.
Well, this property is really good because it has 2 different kinds of bamboo growing 360 degrees all around it. This one we're walking next to is a species of the black bamboo.
Through his use of bamboo,
right now, in the
Bud Morrison is keeping alive a Japanese cultural tradition.
It lasts about 2 months.
He produces
So
most of the Kadomatsu that is sold in Hawaii.
Blasting up through the ground everywhere. And this is one of the ways that botanists identify the bamboo is by the shoot. You see, the bamboo that's growing on this hillside is it's the spreading type of bamboo. There's basically 2 different kinds. There's the spreading kind and the clumping type.
Morrison's company, Tantalus Bamboo, is located here in a beautiful bamboo forest in Tantalus. Here he lives and works and is able to gather all the bamboo he needs for making Kadomatsu and the various other bamboo crafts he produces.
Well, I moved into Tantalus 10 years ago, and my landlady had about a 50 by 70 foot plot of land that was taken over by bamboo. So she said, "Gee, I wish somebody would cut down the bamboo," and so I did. And while I was cutting it down, I took a look at the plant and realized, what a beautiful plant it was, and how the people up here thought it was a pest, and there must be something I could use it for. About 7-8 years ago, I was asked to teach a class in bamboo crafts. And then after my class, the leader of the school at the time asked me, "At Christmas time, could you teach a course in Kadomatsu?" I said, "What's a Kadomatsu?" And so, being a local Japanese lady, she said, "Well, I've only seen bamboo and ironwood, but I've seen pictures of the Japanese ones. And they're made from matsu pine and bamboo, and here are some pictures." And I said, "Sure, I could teach people how to make these."
I find the Kadomatsu to be such an interesting arrangement. It's like a little guardian, you know. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're 7 feet tall, but it's like a guardian for the house, and all the sharp points are supposed to keep the evil spirits away from the house, and all of the ingredients of the Kadomatsu, like the bamboo and the long needle pine and the plum blossom, all have attributes that they're supposed to invite into the house for the coming year.
Morrison learned some of the history of the Kadomatsu while he was preparing to teach his class at Temari.
I was lucky that when they asked me to teach the class at Temari, there was this lady named Kumi Akiyama who was from Tokyo, and she did some research about the Kadomatsu. And the Kadomatsu originated in the Edo period, which was about 500 to 600 years ago in Japan.
Actually, the matsu, the pine, is the main ingredient of the Kadomatsu, because the word itself means gate pine. It doesn't say anything about bamboo or plum blossoms. And when the Kadomatsu itself was first originated, it came from the fact that people used to keep the bucket of sand to put out fires right behind a matsu pine tree by the front door. This was like 600 years ago. And when the house didn't burn down, they figured that the matsu pine tree the sharp needles were keeping the evil spirits out of the house and protecting the house. So it became a practice to have, at least once a year, to have the matsu pine sprig by the door. Kado, gate, matsu pine.
Morrison completes the Kadomatsu by placing pine cuttings and plum blossoms in the base of the arrangement. Morrison's Kadomatsu can be found in stores from mid to late December. Although the Kadomatsu is primarily a New Year's arrangement, Morrison also gets occasional orders, usually for yakudoshi, at other times of the year.
Sashiko is a simple running stitch. It's usually traditionally white thread on an indigo fabric, and it's comparable to American quilting. It is used to strengthen fabric. The difference is that American quilting has a layer, many more layers, and in Japan you can even do it on a single layer of fabric. Its purpose was, first of all, to mend things. They would layer patches on it and then stitch through with that basic running stitch. Later on, they discovered that if they stitched cotton threads through linen fabric, it made the fabric stronger and warmer for winter months. And also, if they sewed 2 layers together, it made the clothing even warmer. You can use Western fabric too, but this is just what I use. Sashiko is traditionally, blue with white, and I just use a real cheap crochet thread on it.
Although today sashiko is generally done on cotton fabrics, cotton was not readily available to commoners in Japan until the 1700s. Before then, sashiko was used on homespun fabrics such as linen and hemp.
But as cotton became more available, they started incorporating designs like this. And let's see, so this is a fabric, and this is sashiko thread that's especially made for sashiko, but you don't have to use things like this. I just brought it out to show. I usually use the crochet thread, and what you need to do is draw the pattern first. I usually use graph paper, and there's so many designs, and they're all traditional Japanese motifs. This is pine. These are supposed to be plovers in flight, woven bamboo. This is the one I'm going to use today.
After drawing the design onto graph paper and putting it on top of a sheet of dressmaker's tracing paper, Matsunaga uses a hera, a Japanese scoring tool, to transfer the design onto the fabric.
So this is called a kuke, and it's marketed under the name third hand because you use it to clamp fabric on. And this is usually put on the floor, but I'm going to sit on it now.
The actual stitching is done using a technique called unshin, literally moving needle, which Japanese sewing students use as a warm-up before class and is the only stitch used in Sashiko. The material is held in place by the kuke. A Japanese thimble, worn between two knuckles, is used to brace the needle, which is then pushed through the fabric. Matsunaga's creations include a wide variety of items that can be worn or used in Hawaii, such as noren curtains, chachanko or baby vests, purses, bags, and pillows.
Got interested in drumming when I was in elementary school and played in the school bands and orchestras through high school. Started getting interested in kind of world music, African drumming, Indian drumming when I was in high school and college. And I had an opportunity to see the drums from Japan in a performance in 1973. This was a Taiko ensemble from San Francisco called the San Francisco Taiko Dojo. And that was a real turning point for me. I really was totally surprised by the performance, and I knew I wanted to do it when I saw it.
And Endo has been turning in amazing performances ever since. He joined the Kinada Taiko group in 1974, and later various other groups, including the San Francisco Taiko Dojo in 1975. Before going to Japan in 1980, Endo performed throughout the United States, including performances with well-known jazz artists such as drummer Art Blakey and percussionist Arto Morera, and he also performed on the soundtrack for the film Apocalypse Now.
I was studying Taiko with the Taiko Dojo and also playing drums, playing in bands for commercial jobs, playing in a jazz group, doing avant-garde things, a lot of things. And I came to a point in my life where I felt that I needed to either do Taiko seriously or play drums seriously. And at that point I decided, well, I'm either going to have to move to New York or to move to Japan, because if I wanted to study Western drums, I really felt that New York is the place to be. Whereas if I was going to get into Japan, get into Taiko, Japan is really the place to be. So I ended up choosing to go the Taiko route.
Endo went to Japan in 1980, where he studied and performed various styles of Taiko. He lived there for 10 years, and we'll talk with him about those years later in the program. But here we see an excerpt of a Kumi Daiko, or Taiko ensemble performance, with Endo, his wife Chizuko, and members of the Hawaii Matsuri Taiko group.
I was born and raised in Hawaii, and I am presently employed as the Executive Secretary of the Hawaii Okinawa Center. I've studied the Okoto, or Kutu in Okinawan, since 1969 under Mrs. Shizuko Kiabu, one of the pioneer Koto teachers, Okinawan Koto teachers in Hawaii. And I also had the opportunity of studying the Okoto in Okinawa under Mrs. Masako Miyagi for about 2 years.
Miyashiro began teaching the Koto in 1987, a decision she made with the encouragement and approval of Kiabu Sensei. Kiabu Sensei gave Miyashiro's school the name Miyashiro Sohokai. The name is a combination of the characters for Koto and Phoenix, a symbol of rebirth, continuity, and good fortune. The name reflects the desire of Miyashiro's school to carry on the culture of the ancestors through the beautiful sounds of the koto.
I have a wide range of people studying the koto with me. Many of them are children, starting from about 7 years old on up to high school. And I have a few adults that are also studying. Two of the ladies are Nisei, and so it's a wide variety of background. And it's quite a challenge because many of the people have very little language background in Japanese or Okinawan, and to try and explain to them something about the song or the dance so that they will sort of grasp the nuance or the flavor of the dance or the song. Well, everyone accepts or understands things differently, so to try and reach these different people, it's quite a challenge. Well, I personally feel very fortunate that the students that are coming here have a wide variety of interests, not only in Okinawan music or dance, but they also have, of course, their strong, their various school activities, and I think they have a lot of support from their parents and grandparents, and I feel very fortunate because something that I've noticed about a few of the students, they're fourth or fifth generation Okinawan, and whereas perhaps their parents or grandparents did not really have the interest, maybe their great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother had played okoto, had played the okoto, had actually owned the instrument, and no one had really used it until very recently when these students showed an interest in it. And hopefully with this kind of spirit that, the music will continue.
Miyashiro serves as Hawaii chapter president of the Okinawan Koto Association, and in addition to teaching koto, she also conducts classes in Okinawan dance and is knowledgeable about Okinawan textiles, especially bingata or Okinawan batik. Later, we'll talk more with Bani Miyashiro. When we return, we'll discuss with the artists influences and experiences that have helped to shape their work. We can all point to certain experiences that have profoundly affected our lives. I asked our artists to share with us some of the experiences that have guided them in their artistic and cultural pursuits. A pivotal period in Kenny Endo's life was the time he spent on an Indian reservation. He went there through a program at his university, expecting to help the Indians, but instead, he ended up learning from them.
Helped me. We always hear so much about how the American Indian has been mistreated, and there's no doubt that they have, but we don't hear enough about the beautiful culture they have, their beautiful way of life, which is still very much alive. And as a result of being there, it made me realize how little I know about my own culture. I couldn't even speak my own language. So when I saw the Taiko, because I was always interested in drumming, it kind of just put it together for me that was a way I could get back to learning about my own culture. At the same time, keep up an art form that I was interested in.
After graduating from college, Karen Matsunaga decided to go to Kyoto.
I'm a Japanese language major from the University of Hawaii, and my main purpose was just to experience the culture and to practice the language. But I wanted to learn something, although I didn't have any plans before I went. So when I got there, a friend introduced me to a woman who had just started taking kimono sewing lessons, and that sounded interesting to me, so that's how I got started. She introduced me to a school.
Matsunaga was looking for a way to practice her kimono sewing when she discovered Sashiko.
the seams are all sewn by hand with a running stitch, and I really needed to practice it. And I saw Sashiko in a shop, and I thought it was so beautiful, and so I began practicing learning it on my own.
I feel very fortunate that my parents have always encouraged me, my grandparents had always encouraged me to study things Okinawan. And I've had the support of my family to do so, all of my aunties and uncles and relatives and friends, to study these different areas.
Miyashiro credits the support from her family, as well as the dedication shown by her teachers for fostering her love of Okinawan culture. She also says that the 2 years she spent studying in Okinawa helped develop her appreciation for its cultural arts.
I think it was a very valuable and wonderful experience. Because perhaps it is Okinawa, you know, there's a very different feeling towards the music, or the degree of performance. There's a very, how do you say, keen sense for detail. And because it is the place for that Okinawan music and dance came from, of course the teachers are very strict.
Before becoming a bamboo artisan, Bud Morrison operated a yard service business, but when he first encountered bamboo, he knew immediately that he wanted to work with it.
The bamboo plant is, you know, right away when I started working with it, it was just like, it was like instant friends. I mean, you know, you have that with people. You know, I mean, you meet someone and right away you know you like them, and that's the way it was with the bamboo. Although, yeah, the very first time I was working with it, I didn't know about its tensile strength, and I was cutting a piece down, and I thought I had cut it all the way through, so I tried to just yank it and throw it off to the side, and what happened was a small tendril of bamboo split, and it sliced my 3 fingers, you know, right to the bone, because it's incredibly sharp. But other than that, you know, it's been real friendly. And it's just been like my friend, and every part of the plant just seems to appeal to me.
My experiences in Japan were, I spent 10 years there, and it's a long time, it's a big chunk of my life. I have to say that most of my experiences were very positive, and that I did get a lot of support for what I was trying to do, what I was trying to study. Eventually I was able to make a living as a professional taiko player. And I actually, in the beginning it was very difficult as a Japanese American going to Japan, because I didn't speak very good Japanese. I still don't think my Japanese is great. But you know, they would look at you like, if you're a typical gaijin with blonde hair and blue eyes, and you know, they don't expect you to speak Japanese. And if you speak a little bit, then they say it's great, it's great. But myself, I looked Japanese, and if I couldn't read or couldn't speak, had strange pronunciation, it always made people step back a couple feet. But when they found out I was Japanese American and had a real purpose for being there, they're generally pretty supportive.
Endo studied and performed 3 main styles of taiko during his decade in Japan. His studies began with what is now the most popular style, kumidaiko, or taiko ensemble. The second style he studied is called hogaku hayashi, the drumming used in the music of kabuki. Endo first studied this style of taiko with Mochizuki Saburo.
And he was very supportive of what I was doing, also a very strict teacher and a very good teacher. And at a certain point, after studying with him for about 5 years, he told me, I want to introduce you to the Iamoto, which is the headmaster. And so he took me to introduce him, and his name is Mochizuki Tazaemon. And I ended up studying with him another 5 years.
The Iamoto eventually awarded Endo a natori, a stage name, in this classical style of taiko. Endo became the first foreigner to receive this distinction. The third style Endo studied is called Edobayashi, which is the festival music of old Tokyo. This style reminded Endo of his roots in American jazz.
And when I first heard this festival music, this Tokyo festival music, it was like the closest thing to jazz that I heard over there. In fact, I always used to say, I would even tell my jazz musician friends in Japan, I said that the Edo Bayashi is closer to American jazz than the Japanese jazz. And they would get a little bit offended, but what I was talking about was not the music itself, but the feeling that comes out of the feeling of, there's a word in Japanese called nori, which we would call it playing in the groove or swing. That Edo Bayashi just has that swing to it, that groove.
Endo created a Taiko style uniquely his own by drawing on his background in Western drums and his Japanese training.
Out of that evolved kind of out of my own work, my own style, which is more of a, it's a modern type of drumming which combines a lot of Western rhythms because I did used to play drum set. But at the same time, I think there's an influence of all the different kinds of drumming that I did study in Japan. But for my own work in the last 5 years of being in Japan, I would say quite a bit of my work was on my own modern pieces.
Karen Matsunaga's studies in Japan led her to a kimono sewing school called Shinso Ohashi Gakuin, located in the heart of Kyoto's textile district.
It was a traditional school. We had to sit on the floor, tatami mat floor, with low tables, and we used the traditional tools. In other schools, the interest in wearing and sewing kimono is really diminishing in Japan. So some schools are trying to make it more attractive to, modern women by using the metric system and things like that. But this school, we had to use the ancient system of measure, Chinese system of measure.
Matsunaga learned to use these traditional tools, including the ancient Chinese measure called shaku and the Japanese iron.
So this is the iron that we used, and a long time ago, this was placed in the charcoal and heated up, and then of course it had to be wiped down because it was black with soot.
But traditional tables, tatami mat floors, and tools weren't the only surprises Matsunaga encountered at her sewing school.
And what surprised me was that at lunchtime we had to take our turn, make tea for everyone for lunch. And then afterwards, another thing that really surprised me was we had to take turns and sweep the tatami mat and then wipe it down, put away the tables and everything, which I think is really great, when I look back. But when I first learned I had to do that, I was really surprised.
In these traditional surroundings, Matsunaga learned to sew kimono.
This is the kind of thing that I learned how to sew in Japan. And these are done all by hand.
But Matsunaga wasn't as interested in sewing kimono as she was in learning to make things that would be practical in Hawaii. She turned her attention to accessories such as purses and garments like jackets and pants, and also noren, or doorway curtains. She combined the sewing skills she learned at school with a Sashiko technique she learned on her own by embroidering her creations with Sashiko stitching. Because of her studies in Kyoto, Matsunaga was offered a chance to teach Sashiko and sewing in Hawaii.
Before I left Japan, I had friends who had told the educational director at Temari, which is a Center for Asian Pacific Fiber Arts. Someone had told her and Asakura that I was coming back, and so she wrote me a letter asking me if I was interested in teaching and that there was an interest here.
Teaching has become an important way for Matsunaga to share her knowledge of Sashiko with others. The other artists are also involved in teaching and have some definite opinions on its value. When we come back, we'll speak with them about teaching, and we'll also ask them to discuss the importance of community support in cultivating cultural arts.
After returning from Okinawa, I was very much encouraged by my dance teacher as well as my Koto teacher, my dance teacher in Hawaii, Mrs. Yoshiko Nakasone, and Kyabu Sensei to continue and to share what I had learned in Okinawa with the people here. So basically, I feel that rather than teaching all of these different things, I feel like I'm sharing it with whoever comes here. I think it's important because I've had the opportunity to study under masters here as well as in Okinawa, and I think it's also important to share this so that especially younger people will understand something about the Okinawan culture, and that there would be some continuity of it in the future.
In my generation, growing up, there just wasn't too much, well, in terms of taiko, there wasn't any taiko, so I didn't even have a choice about it. So most of us of my age started fairly late playing taiko. Whereas the kids growing up today, they see taiko all the time. They've been seeing it since they were born, and they have a real advantage. And I really think the art of taiko will blossom or really raise to a higher level in the next generation. And the stronger foundation we give to the kids to do that, the more, in other words, it's limitless, the potential there.
In December, the school Timari in Kaimuki, they've continued having the Kadomatsu class every year. Every year I teach about 30 people. That's about the limit of the class. And then now that I make so many, my time is limited in December for my ability to teach the class itself. So, I teach about 30 people a year how to make Kadomatsu.
I came back in 1981, and I first started by teaching Sashiko, just a few patterns on making a bag. But it quickly developed into a lot more. People wanted to learn how to make chanchanko, which are little vests, monpe, which are the field pants, jackets, even baby kimono, and little purses. And so at that time, I was asked to add, even 2 and 3 more classes because they would fill up so quickly. I have a family now, and so I really don't devote, the time I used to, but I do teach Sashiko classes. I don't have the kind of response that I used to, but I am teaching a different kind of class, and it has been 10 years since I started, and since then there have been several people who continue teaching Sashiko, so I think that's part of the reason. And another factor might be that I'm teaching a different kind of Sashiko class. One of my students has continued teaching the regular Sashiko, white on blue, and so I do what looks like a more complicated technique, and that might be discouraging to some people too. So no, my classes aren't as big as they used to be.
There's no doubt that by teaching, these artists share their knowledge with others and help to ensure a continuation of their arts. And there are many other teachers as well. There is, however, concern in the Japanese American community that some of these arts may be lost in the near future. But how do the artists themselves feel about the level of support in the community? You may be surprised by their comments.
I think the exposure in the Okinawan community with the festivals, with various dance and music performances from Okinawa, as well as the very, very hard work of our master instructors living in Hawaii, really since the first days that the immigrants came from Okinawa 91 years ago. I think there's always been a strong support for this, and I think we're very fortunate for that in Hawaii.
Well, every year when we make Kadomatsus, I have 2 brothers from Indonesia that have helped me now for 3 years, and so they've learned how to make Kadomatsus from every stage. This past year we made around 4,000 Kadomatsus, varying in size from 16 inches tall to 7 feet tall. The bulk of them, we make the small arrangement, Kadomatsu arrangement, and they're sold at supermarkets and variety stores.
Selling 4,000 Kadomatsu is a pretty good indication that people are still interested in that tradition, especially when they're sold even at the supermarket. But you've probably noticed by now that in spite of the traditional nature of his craft, Bud Morrison isn't Japanese American and he has never been to Japan. I asked him if he ever gets any comments about that.
I get a lot of comments like that. I get a lot of laughter. I mean, people will call me up and say, I can't believe I'm calling a haole guy to get a Kadomatsu. Or they'll say, have you ever been to Japan? I'll say, no. They say, gee, well, I don't know. You know, here I am. I'm learning about Kadomatsu from this Caucasian, you know. Yeah, quite often.
Initially, some people find it strange that the largest producer of Kadomatsu in Hawaii isn't Japanese. But according to Morrison, most quickly get used to the idea. His classes are full every year, and the orders keep coming in. Like Morrison, Karen Matsunaga also sells her work, usually at craft fairs. She has even written a book about Sashiko, called Japanese Country Quilting. It was published in 1990 by Kodansha International, and is not only a how-to book on Sashiko, with numerous patterns and examples, but also provides historical background on the craft as well. Matsunaga finds that although the number of people learning Sashiko may not be increasing, there are many people who are interested in purchasing Sashiko products.
I enjoy the production part of it, and because it gives me more freedom as far as I can cut when I want and sew when I want. I like to do that now more than teach the class, because with the class I have to be at a certain place at a certain time, and it's a little more difficult. But I did start making recently vests and jackets, and I do decorate it with a little bit of Sashiko, and those have been selling really well, which surprises me because I do have to take into account, you know, the time that I spend. So, but people seem to be willing to purchase things like that, you know, and I think they rather purchase it than make it themselves.
It seems that there is a fair amount of community support for these artists, but that is not to say, as Kenny Endo points out, that one can easily make a living practicing a traditional art.
I've found that there's a lot of support for Taiko in terms of an interest. People are very interested. I was asked to perform many times. As far as making a living doing it, I don't really know. I hope that eventually the support will include, you know, supporting people who are interested in doing this as a living, which I do. At this point, I think it's really difficult. People tend to think that I do this just for a hobby, or that it's something that people tend to think that it's just something that I do because I'm interested in it and I love it. But in fact, it's my bread and butter. That's how I feed my family.
I asked the artists if they thought, in spite of what seems to be a healthy level of community interest, that the difficulty involved in trying to be a full-time artist in Hawaii would eventually lead to the demise of these traditional arts. It's no secret, after all, that the high cost of everything from housing to food makes it difficult to devote one's time to an activity that doesn't significantly contribute to the family coffers. And what about community support? With the number of choices confronting people these days, will they choose more and more not to attend Japanese cultural events? And will parents no longer be able to afford to send their children to Koto lessons, in addition to their other activities? Bonnie Miyashiro doesn't think so.
I think as long as we have people that enjoy the music, enjoy the dance first of all, and we continue to have support from our teachers, as well as the community in general. And the more that this is exposed, this gives a wider avenue for people to understand the music and to appreciate it, music and dance as well.
I think there probably will always be a certain number of people who are interested in doing it. because right now, for my classes, the numbers are kind of small, you know, relatively speaking. But there's so many other things now that people can do, and there's so many choices. And needlework in general, for this kind of needlework, I think, isn't increasing in demand, I mean, you know, in popularity as far as doing it yourself. I think people would rather buy it than do it themselves.
Not only in the United States, but in Japan in the last 30 years, there's been undergoing a renaissance of the first type of drumming I talked about, kumidaiko, taiko ensembles. There's a big renaissance. There's groups from Japan travel around the world. People are exposed to it more. When I was growing up, there just wasn't, you just weren't able to see it very often. So I think that there's definitely more exposure to taiko, and I hope that not just taiko, but just other arts, Japanese arts, not just Japanese arts, but traditional arts, especially being here in Hawaii, the traditional Hawaiian arts are, you know, kept alive, and the younger people had taken interest in it.
Bud Morrison, like the other artists, doesn't feel there's a lack of community support. In fact, between his teaching and the large volume of Kadomatsu orders that come in December, he has trouble keeping up.
Well, the thing about the Kadomatsu arrangement is it's a fresh arrangement. So you can't really get started in October making Kadomatsus for December. So my first order is due on the 15th usually of December. So I usually start about 3 days ahead of that, and we're usually working like 1 or 2 days ahead of our orders, so that the Kadomatsus that are being delivered are as fresh as possible.
The artists seem to feel that community support will not fade in the future. But what is being done to ensure that the next generation of artists is properly nurtured? I asked Karen Matsunaga if she would encourage her own daughter to become a Sashiko artisan.
I don't know if I encourage her. She's very little. She's only 3.5, but I guess she's at the age where she likes to copy, you know, whatever I do. So she's already expressed an interest in learning it. But I don't feel it's really important that she do that particular thing, you know, but I would be happy if she took an interest in one of the cultural arts, you know, like dancing or, you know, drum playing or whatever it is.
I think that perhaps when we were much younger, it was kind of your parents or grandparents trying to force you to enter dance lessons or Koto lessons or whatever the art was, medium was. But I think although many of the students maybe have to be encouraged by their parents, there are many students who, because of the exposure in the community, are showing the initiative and the interest from their side to learn these different things.
Kenny Endo agrees with Miyashiro that community exposure serves to encourage children to study the arts. Encouragement by example, according to Endo, is the best way to engage the next generation of artists.
I would say that just doing what you do for the people who do the traditional things, just doing what you do and doing it the best you can, and trying to raise the level as high as possible.
Endo is very concerned about achieving a high artistic level in his music. In Japan, he is well known in the Taiko world and has performed in radio and TV commercials, has been a featured soloist at festivals and concerts, and has toured all over the world with various groups. This dedication to excellence, Endo says, will inspire the next generation.
When you talk about Asian American art in this country, it's very young still, so we still have so much to go. The higher the level becomes, the more respect it will get, not only in the general community, but among our own community as well. So I think raising the level, the quality, the artistic level of those forms is really important.
When we return, some final thoughts about the future. In this program, you have met 4 people whose practice of traditional Japanese arts contributes to the cultural richness of life in Hawaii. They are positive examples of what can be done to cultivate the traditional arts, and their optimism about the future is encouraging. I asked them to share with us some final thoughts about the future.
I would like to see into the future and see that I'm still another 10 years from now working in bamboo, and that I could be teaching someone else, the different things that I've learned about how to use the tools on it and how to go about working with the medium itself.
I'd like to continue the production part, sewing, just because I enjoy that. But I also enjoy teaching because I meet so many nice people who are interested in doing the same thing, and I get a real good feeling, sense of satisfaction when I can teach something that makes or helps people to learn more about themselves and the history. I like to talk about the background when I teach, instead of just doing the actual thing. It makes it have more meaning.
I don't feel that any of these arts should be forced on younger people. I think that just the fact that it's there, the fact that there's an opportunity to study it is important in itself. And there should be people that are capable, in capable positions, teaching them. But it shouldn't be forced. If you force things, then eventually people will just quit or lose interest. They should want to do it out of themselves. So maybe out of 1,000 kids, maybe 1 will be interested in learning Taiko. But if that person is sincerely interested, I want to guide him or give him the tools to be able to go all the way with it, and just, and the next generation will just probably raise the level, 10 times more than what we did.
Well, hopefully in the future we will have the continuity of the traditional performing arts, and I hope that perhaps the music and dance the traditional classical music and dance will always be retained, and perhaps something from this, the dance technique, the flavor in the music, will be used in other avenues too, for new choreographies, for new songs, perhaps some other uses for the music as well.
As Bonnie Miyashiro suggests, finding new ways to enjoy traditional arts while at the same time preserving them is the challenge that now faces us. Culture is a dynamic force that constantly evolves. No amount of constraint can stop this natural process, nor is it necessarily desirable to do so. But this does not mean that cultural preservation is impossible. Traditional arts, as we have seen, can be preserved. But as we are faced with more and more options for spending our hard-earned dollars and leisure time, we need to think about what is really important to us. Rather than looking at the demise of cultural traditions or examining social trends and demographics, this program has explored only a small part of Japanese culture in Hawaii. But for those of us interested in cultural preservation and growth, perhaps this was a good place to start. It seems that Bud Morrison will be cutting next year's bamboo, and at least for a while our Kadomatsu supply is safe. Likewise, Karen Matsunaga, Kenny Endo, and Bonnie Miyashiro are all dedicated to their respective arts, and they're optimistic about the future of Japanese-American culture in Hawaii. They're optimistic, but at the same time their message is clear. In order to secure a rich cultural future, we need to encourage and support those individuals and groups who actively cultivate the traditions that are meaningful to us. Thank you very much for watching.